So last week we didn't go into any of the new text? Didn't go for, okay. So we're going to pick up where we left off, I guess, a couple weeks ago. Bottom page 46, in a chapter called Concentration and Wisdom. So here, the Sixth Patriarch is starting this section by talking about the single practice samadhi, the I Ching San Mei. And by that he means the disposition, the equanimity, the insight, the purity, if you will, are something that are present with us at all times, in all places, and not something that comes and goes, or is turned on or turned off, or you enter or leave. It's a constant state of being. And that's why it's called, single practice means all practice, all activities. You could say practice means all activities of life. And in this he means walking, standing. Of course he says that's sitting and lying down. Any aspect of your life is a potential way place. And from his point of view, the way place is, in fact, the entire world of your being, of your existence. And there's no time then that you're not in the way place while you're in the world. And while you're in the world, there's no time you're not in a way place. These are part of the principle of what he means non-duality, not making false dichotomies, another way of looking at it. And he says, when you are this way, then you're true. It's not an on and off thing. It's not something you practice and put down. You're always in this state. This is partly the meaning of the word sincerity. Sincerity is considered this total, complete oneness, body, mind, thought, feelings, emotions, even livelihood. There's nothing that doesn't express your spiritual nature, and there's nothing that your spiritual nature doesn't infuse into it. So this is actually quite wonderful because it means the sacred and the profane, or the sacred and the holy, or the worldly or world transcending, are all in the here and now. They're not someplace beyond, they're not in the past, they're not in the future, they're right in the here and now, depending on how you work this. If you work this formula really well, it's extremely creative and lively and dynamic. It's wondrous. And then the text says, from wonder to wonder, existence opens. From this wonder to wonder, your existence potential just keeps unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. There's no end to it. And from the Bodhisattva's path is that when you get really good at this, the energy, the vibes, if you will, the results of this integrated wholeness starts to radiate without you wishing to. It just sort of exudes, like the sun. Like the sun doesn't think I'm going to be bright or I'm going to shine. Its energy is so full and complete, it just radiates out. And this radiation of light and energy and virtue, if you will, is infectious. Just like the sun radiates and plants gravitate. There's what's called heliotropic. They move towards the sun because the energy that the sun gives nourishes and stimulates and catalyzes them. Everything moves on the sun's energy, even water and air. You can see this as the day starts, the world comes alive with sunlight. I can really feel this up in Maine. When you get up in the morning, it's really cold. The lake is really calm. There's sort of a mist on the lake. But as the sun comes up, the clouds start to rise, the heat starts to come. All the animals and birds become very activated, and everything's vibrating. It's really humming. In the same way, an enlightened being, or a being that's enlightening, when this energy is full and radiant and complete, it goes out and affects people. It doesn't have to be spoken. There doesn't have to be an agenda to present it. It just comes naturally. And that's why someone who's like this becomes a beacon or a magnet for others, because they want to be in that energy. They want to, and of course, the sort of irony of it is that the enlightened being doesn't give that energy or doesn't transfer it, but merely stimulates it within the person, because each person has that whole and complete. And so it's like maybe a light transferred to another candle, to another candle, to another candle, and then the candle burns on its own. It doesn't need to have that light constantly. So when we think about this, without necessarily trying to be this way, to try to transfer merit and virtue and so forth, it's happening naturally. It's happening naturally because in the completeness of walking, standing, sitting, lying down, wherever you are, because it's so sincere and so true, it just has its own power. And that power then spreads and radiates and can change the world, can actually change the world. So he's talking about this, and he says, of course, in the text and in the teachings, there's many ways to activate this energy, this light, this virtue, wisdom, prajna. Because you don't think of prajna as some abstract metaphysical wisdom. Prajna is this light. It's this energy moving and transforming, allowing us to see the world in new and different ways, see ourselves in new and different ways, imagine and then enact another reality from prajna. Where prajna is active, it's dynamic, it's moving, it's not a passive thing, and it shows in activities. So prajna works its way in and creates wondrous things, from architecture to institutions, to learning centers, to monasteries. There's nothing it couldn't touch that brings out the light in others. In the same way, you can see in those specifics the prajna. So just as a prajna manifests in those specifics, the specifics show back that this was prajna, this is working this way. And in relationships, it's the same way. Relationships happening within this context are liberating, they're free, they're bringing out the best in the person, and there's less and less afflictions, and you see the fullness of the being starting to flourish and develop in relationships. So this is not pulling away from the world or relationships at all. It's infusing them naturally with not the intent, like, I'm going to infuse the world with... No, because that messes it up. It's like Shakespeare says, the quality of mercy, the quality of mercy, charity, giving, is not strained. It's not an effort. He says it falls just like the gentle rain. So when these qualities are full, they just fall. They radiate. And that's what he means below when he's starting tonight. He says the way should be open and free-flowing. This is the bottom where we're starting the passage tonight. And this free-flowing describes the unattached, liberated mind or heart that's in this state. And you can't get there without being free-flowing, without letting go. But then when you're there, you cannot keep it but from flowing. And so it's a wonderful non-duality again. While you're in that state, you have to stay unattached and free-flowing. But in that state, because you're unattached and free-flowing, it goes everywhere. So this is one of the meanings of a sort of an esoteric phrase. Roll it up, it secretly hides away. Unfold it, it fills the universe. And there's actually some meditation contemplations that you can do with something like this. But this is the idea. And in a sense, it's not yours. It's not you. It's just coming in and through with you. And as long as you're in that state, as soon as you try to own it, possess it, you stop it. You pick a rose and it wilts. It's that simple. Let it grow on the vine. It just keeps going its natural way. So this is what he's talking about in this passage. And the reason he's bringing up sitting meditation here is because the Sixth Patriarch, when he has his awakening experience, he really has a broad and full understanding that this is not just Buddhism or religion or some sectarian creed or dogma. This is the complete unfolding and opening up of the human nature at its deepest and finest. And it doesn't have any boundaries or divisions like this. It doesn't have any limitations. And he said, and so what he's doing is he's sort of working in a context where the cultivation of it at a particular time manifests through a certain amount of religious and spiritual practices, which are good, which are conducive to the opening up of this. But they are means to an end and not the end in itself. And that's what he's trying to bring out. That's why there's so many of them. It's not like there's one, there's said to be, they use the number 84,000 of these techniques to do this. And that's just a big number in Chinese. It doesn't literally mean there's 84,000 or you make a list and have a topology 84,000. It just means it can be done by giving. It can be done by cultivating a sort of a pure conscience. It can be done through deep study of spiritual documents. It can be done through recitation, bowing, sitting meditation. It can be done 24/7, any place at any time. Any activity become a Dharma door for liberation. Conversely, with the wrong intention, with the wrong understanding, all of these 84 Dharma doors can become obstructions. This is the trick. The magic is not per se in the Dharma door, but in the using of it with pure intention and correctly. And then it serves its purpose. I guess you could say it's not unlike medicine. There's 84,000 kinds of medicine. When taken appropriately, and I mean diagnostically correct, and with the right intention, for example, I have pain, I'm going to take the narcotic to ease the pain so I can sleep and so forth. But gee, I could take more of that narcotic and get to another state here, and then pretty soon there's addiction. So intention has to do with how you use it properly and appropriate. So 84 of those medicines properly used become healing, salutary, really powerful devices. The same medicine used with wrong intention and with wrong diagnosis can become harmful and even fatal. So Dharma is this way. It's not like it's intrinsically good or bad. It depends much on intention and how it's used. And this is the skill of practice. So in this particular case, he uses the words above, cling to and latch on. I like that. Latch means to fasten onto. Cling to is to, wrap not only wrap your limbs, but your mind and your emotions and everything around something, or wrap your identity around something. So the clinging and the latching on is a absolute kind of collapsing of this consciousness, this virtue, wisdom that radiates. It's shrinking it down to a smaller realm that is me and mine. And in some sense, it feels secure and settling. But in the other sense, because it's a restriction, it's a closing down of consciousness, it becomes a place of attachment, a place of getting stuck. And then it starts to turn sour, and afflictions arise from it. We either fear we're going to lose it, or fear that it's going to be taken away, or fear we can't regenerate it. And as with everything that comes and goes, there's no way that you can nail it down. And so again, he comes back and he's stressing here one particular practice that he's bringing out. This could apply to anything. It could apply to bowing. It can even apply to rituals and devotions and ceremonies. There's an actual category of a wrong approach, a wrong attitude, where you use the ritual ceremonies and devotions as a substitute for self-cultivation. You say, this ritual or ceremony in and of itself will lead me to nirvana and awakening. And so you attach to the external ceremony, which is meant to be used in a different way, and you then get into a view where the ceremonies, rituals, and even the precepts become a prohibitive type of spiritual activity because they inhibit the full development. And you externalize it to think the magic is in them rather than in the mind or the mind's liberation. So here he's talking about meditation. He's just going into meditation, and that's why he says, he gives this quote above, the deluded person, not the clear person. And deluded means your intention is off, or you're not clear about what the practice is for. So it's really important to find out why and ask yourself, why do I sit in meditation? But he says, the deluded person, seizing on what's the appearance, the externals of meditation, latches on and then conflates this with a single practice samadhi and say, I'm doing the single practice samadhi. I'm sitting in meditation, only meditation. I don't do anything else. This is a mistaken view of the single practice samadhi. And then he says, and the quote is, I constantly sit unmoving. I constantly sit unmoving. And this is talking about prolonged sitting. Prolonged sitting. And my mind never stirs. This is a single practice samadhi. And the Patriarch says, those who interpreted this rendered themselves insensate and create conditions that obstruct the way. Now, obstructing the way means your way. It doesn't mean the way as some abstract, truth. It obstructs your walking. It obstructs your liberation. It's like putting a tether on your feet. You ever see, I've never had this, so I don't know, maybe try it, but I always see people who have been put in shackles and chains, and when they have them around their feet, they're shuffling. I can't think, well, why don't they just walk? Well, if you look at the chain, it doesn't allow a full stride, and so it's an awkward step, and so they shuffle along in the chains because they can't get a full stride. Of course, then they can't run away. But in the same way, he's saying here, your walking of the way becomes inhibited in the same way as if putting chains on your feet or putting a straitjacket on your body. Or sometimes you have, this girdle. I remember when I was growing up, my mother and sisters used to wear girdles. I never understood, but I saw them. And it would change their shape, but really compress the torso. But then when they'd come home after something, I didn't see. I would hear them zip, zip, and they, I was like, whoa, released. I understand, too, this is also somewhat true of Japanese kimonos. If you really put them on properly, you're really, you got an awesome deportment, but you're really tied up. And so after you've had a few bites of food or something, this starts to... So when they would wear these things on Thanksgiving, I could see the afflictions arising. And so it was always a joy for me when that ended, because they get a little uptight towards the end of the day. Anyhow, so it's sort of like that. I don't mean to be too facetious. I'm just saying whatever it is that impedes you, for example, if you're doing Tai Chi practice, if you're closer to Tai Chi, it restricts your movements. The movements restricted restrict the Chi. The Chi not flowing, it obstructs and blocks. And then you can't get the movement. Klesha is basically restrictions or chains put on our Buddha nature. Anger, jealousy, hatred, lust, torpor. All of these are seen, and that's one of the words they use for the klesha, is the chains or the shackles or the yokes, because in a physiological and psychological and spiritual way, it restricts and inhibits the free flowing. And so he's just talking here about samadhi. I found the insensate to be really interesting, because sometimes people who are practicing or trying to practice this get the impression that cultivation is making one's body, one's mind, and one's sensibilities numb and dull and not alive and active, insensate. In other words here, unfeeling. And the reason I point this out is and I think the text will support me, you cannot get the full liberation of your three karmas of body, mouth, and mind by numbing them or shutting them down. You have to open and let them flow. At the same time, not latch on and cling to them. So these are like very powerful tools, very powerful sensors that allow you to see how what you think and do and say has ramifications. Without feeling, you don't know. My words, my thoughts, my actions, what do they do to myself and others? So you have to have this incredibly open sensibility working 24/7. At the same time, let it be free-flowing and unattached, like back and forth. It's just taking in information and data. This is a meaning of everywhere engaged, nowhere attached. So the sensibility, and in fact, if you wanted to say spiritual powers, shentong, the five eyes and so forth, are merely an extension and expansion of our innate sensibilities, now unhindered by attachment grasping. So it's not like it's something extraordinary that comes in at some point. It's just an opening and letting go of what restricts it. And so a fully awakened being is someone whose capacities for feeling and sensibility are heightened rather than dulled. Heightened in the sense, that's also a relative term, they're full. They're functioning fully. Heightened is relative to suppressed. And so when we have a feeling of something opening, we feel, oh my God, I got something. But it's just a natural coming back. It's like, your arms fell asleep, you had a tourniquet on it, you let go, the blood flows back, you go, whoa, whoa. I still do that. I sleep really funny, and this arm or something, I go to sleep, and then it feels really fat and full, and I try to grab something, I can't grab it, and I think, oh my gosh, whoa. And then it starts coming back, and there's live tingling. It's like, whoa, that's pretty exciting. Yeah, but it's like, now it's back, and it's natural. And so the same thing, awakening, suddenly, when people have a fuller and fuller awakening, they go, wow, how unexpected, how surprising. But then they settle. They don't keep going, wow, wow, wow. They just do it initially because it was like, I had it all along. Here it was, it's opened up, and now they just move on. But that initial sensation is an opening. So insensate is just the opposite. It's shutting down on this sensibility. As you shut those down, you shut down, I would say, your karmic antenna. I don't know how else to use that. Your karmic antenna, your klesha or not klesha, is it increasing my capacity for kindness, compassion, understanding, or diminishing it? You have to be aware to know that. And sometimes your best meters of this, of course, are your own internal mechanisms, but it's often the living beings around you. They will also give feedback of whether this is the way or not the way. And so to be aware of that, to see that, means you have to be sensate. Now, does that mean you don't meditate? No. So you meditate, and yet you don't lose your sensibility. You don't lose that fullness. Wow, this is pretty tricky. And that's what he means by single practice. So let's go and we'll read this section. He says, good and wise friends, the way meaning this way of living, this way of being, should be open and free-flowing. How could it be impeded? When the mind does not cling to anything, the way accordingly circulates and flows. The mind that clings to dharmas ties itself up, and this is called self-bondage. If you say that always sitting without moving is correct, then you're like Shariputra, who was scolded by Vimalakirti for sitting quietly in the forest. I'm going to read, we got time, I'll read that passage to you, this when Vimalakirti scolds Shariputra. When I read this, I thought, I got scolded a lot. Geez, I'm in good company. If Shariputra gets scolded, I get scolded. Well, isn't that not so bad? So here he's saying, but we shouldn't mistake this open and free-flowing to just let it all hang out. I don't know, I mean, you all know what I mean by that expression? I can tell. It's kind of 60s, 70s, I don't know. It's like, okay, so there was a kind of movement in the 60s that was based on a reaction to a kind of uptightness in the 40s and 50s. And in other words, people were, for various reasons, repressing, suppressing their feelings, their emotions, and lifestyles, and so forth. And so the 60s was meant to be an opening up, a flowering, the letting go of those repressions and inhibitions. And it was based on largely a Freudian philosophy of psychology, which was that our natural desires and impulses and so forth, if we let them go, would just run wild and amok, and so we had to have them contained. And one way of containing them was the social constraints that were put on and so forth, and then we internalized these, and that we were kind of like, and that's best you could do with civilization. That's why he wrote Civilization Its Discontents, because to have civilization, there's a certain amount of discontent. Why? Because you have to inhibit. Right? Now, I think, and well, anyhow, and so Freud and others felt that this was the tension in the human condition. And then in the 60s, there was a kind of interesting psychological move that said, well, let's just let that stuff go. Let's let those inhibitions go and get back to a more id-like existence, where we're just letting our thoughts and feelings and emotions go everywhere. And so this opened up this sense. And of course, then the idea of letting go, of free-flowing, letting it all hang out, so the hair, you just let your hair grow, and you just wore whatever clothes, and you just sort of dropped out of the whole repressive structure that had all these expectations. So, it was tune in, turn on, drop out. That was the mantra. So you tune in to how repressed you are. You turn on, which is you activate all that stuff, literally, figuratively and literally. You turned on through various device, what would you call those, agents that would release that, psychotropic agents. And you dropped out. You just dropped out of the whole expectation structure, the whole superego you just pulled away from. This is not that, by the way. I just want to be clear. So when Master Hui was lecturing this in the 60s, of course, he had to make this really clear, that wasn't the free-flowing that was being talked about. This is a free-flowing that comes from having not only subdued these, but subdued them in a way that's so natural because you know that they don't lead to liberation. In other words, if that indeed led to liberation, then there would be no reason not to do that. But it actually, as we discovered, led to considerably more and different afflictions. And so this free-flowing has to do with letting your Buddha nature be full and unimpeded by, interestingly or conversely, by not giving in to these unexamined impulses and passions and so forth. And so it's kind of an irony that the ultimate freedom that comes is not just in letting go of everything, but in getting into its proper relationship, getting it into its proper harmony. The thoughts, the feelings, emotions, working in harmony is the full liberation. There's a phrase from Robert Frost, one of his poems. I really like it. He says he's on the farm and he's watching this horse that's been around for a long time, and the horse is just working and doing its thing, and it's really, really functioning and not wild. And he says the horse has now achieved the state where it's moving freely in light harness. Moving freely in light harness. And it's like there's a harness, but it's just light. It doesn't have to be restricted. It's just like a loose harness. Because the other one that's very good with this is the famous the child going after the ox print, the Chan series. I don't know if you've seen them. I mean, sometime I'll bring them and show them. There's a series of prints, woodblock prints, that shows this little boy trying to find an ox, get the ox, subdue the ox. And then finally, he goes through this thing. At the beginning, the ox is all over the place, and finally he sees the tail of the ox. And he's like, there's the ox. And he grabs the tail, but the ox is just pulling him around. And then finally he gets a little harness on it and da-da-da. And then finally one of the last ones, he's just riding on top of the ox playing a flute. Moving freely in light harness, so to speak. But the ox is the mind. It's the nature that now has been regulated, tamed, and subdued, and brought into a harmony. And so now it's free. So this is another way of looking at it. Anyhow, I just want to make sure none of you went back to the 60s on this phrase here. Then he says it circulates. Good and wise friends, there are also people who teach sitting, gazing into the mind, contemplating tranquility without moving or getting up. They claim this will produce good results. Confused people lacking discernment grab onto this practice and go mad. There are such people, many such people. You should understand that these kinds of teachings are really off, mistaken. So here he's talking about a kind of stopping of the mind that then doesn't return to movement and stillness being non-dual, but just becomes stillness. So it's an artificial stopping. It's a repressing of the mind's activities. And this is why he says you go mad. It's not the free-flowing. So the free-flowing means that you're still, meaning you have equanimity, unattachment in the midst of the things. So stillness in this context here doesn't mean stopping and holding only to one point. That's just an expedient device to get to see what the mind's fluctuations are. The real stillness is walking, standing, sitting, lying down, not grasping, not rejecting, not being confused. So it's an equanimity, it's a dynamic balance. That's what stillness means. It's not a sort of a funeral stillness. It's not the stillness of, my teacher said this stillness, he called it dead wood, rotten wood. He said this is a stillness of rotten wood or dead ashes. And these are poetic metaphors to use to describe their stillness, but it's actually a premature kind of insensibility and deadness. And the meditation then doesn't mean you don't do the meditation, but you do the meditation with the idea that it's a means to getting at this more complete stillness. So you use a temporary holding or fixation, whatever you want to call the shamatha, the stopping, the zhi. You use that as a technique to just sort of say, wow, I don't even know what my mind's doing. So by doing that stillness, you get to see. And by those moments of seeing, you get a sense of, I could hear, regulate, subdue, move, and whatnot. That allows you then to get off the cushion and then expand that activity of stillness to movement in working through life. This is the goal, but there's two things. One, sometimes people get attached to the stillness because it's so far out. It can be really pleasant. There's no doubt about that. You read some of the texts, when they talk about entering these various dhyanas and samadhis, they're pretty far out. They're pretty blissful. I mean, you're thinking, well, I sit and I feel a lot of pain. It's past the pain. You get past the pain, you get past the irritation and whatnot, and then you can get in a profound zidzai or a profound ease. And sometimes this is so powerful and so attractive, it's those who enter it say there's no worldly pleasure that even comes close to this pleasure that comes from this bliss of sitting in this serene samadhi. Not sex, not food, nothing like that even touches us. That's why people in it can go for hour after hour, sometimes weeks, in this state and not feel like they're missing or lacking. It's sort of like, well, why did you ring the bell and bring me out? I was really in this zone. So sometimes you get attached to it in this way. But sometimes you get attached to it out of fear, not fondness. And this is it seems kind of, because you're afraid to re-enter. You're afraid to go back out, and becomes a way of escaping and denying. And so people use the meditation, entering the stillness, to pull away from a larger reality, and to pull away from, understanding the three karmas as they engage in the world. And so it becomes a premature sort of death of mind and body and emotion. But also, the Buddha called it a kind of oblivion. I don't know, that's one translation. In other words, you become insensate purposely so that you don't experience any kind of discomfort or pleasure because you know it's everywhere. And so it's actually not unlike getting drugged or stoned or becoming addicted to something that takes you away from that reality. But it's generated by a fear of the suffering, a fear of facing things. And so it can become a kind of escapism. It's very tricky. So here's all I'm saying is, you say meditation's good. Be careful. Meditation could be good. Meditation could not be so good. It depends on intention and how it's done. If it's done properly and leads to the single practice samadhi, which is to prajna and liberation, then it's effective a tool. If, on the other hand, it's going the other way, it isn't bad, but you're using it wrongly. So thinking about it this way, the theory becomes extremely important to understand. Why is there meditation? Why are there precepts? Why are these things being done? What are they for? And this is why you have to know where this goes. Otherwise, they can become dead ends. Okay, so that being said, let me share with you this Vimalakirti section. I'm trying to fulfill things I promise. I promise I do things and I don't, so here I'm going to try to promise I do this. So this is chapter 3 in this text. This is the text I'm trying to see what anybody know the Chinese? The teaching, the Vimalakirti Sutra, what's the Chinese?
Wei Mo Jie Jing.
Wei Mo Jie Jing? Okay. And Vimalakirti, very interestingly, is a layman. He's not a monk. But this text quotes Vimalakirti quite a bit because of one of the major influences for the direct teaching, the mind ground of this Chan school, for example. He starts the passage, remember, the Vimalakirti Sutra says, this is right in the passage on 46, the direct mind is a place of awakening, the direct mind is a pure land. That's a quote from the Vimalakirti text. And then throughout he has references to Vimalakirti. For example, that phrase we use, the mind regulated and subdued, why toil following rules, meaning why work at the precepts when your mind is already subdued and tamed. Your steps, your life straight and true, what you sitting in meditation. Okay? And then there's another section, I can't remember, where's the verse where he says you don't have to be in a monastery to cultivate? Remember? Mm-hmm. That's also Vimalakirti inspired. I just couldn't find that place. 42. Oh, right. Right before it? If you wish to cultivate this practice, you can do it at home. I'm looking at page 42. You do not have to be in a monastery. If you can cultivate at home, now this doesn't mean at home literally, okay? It doesn't mean in your condo or your apartment. It means in the world, if you will. If you can cultivate at home, you're like a person of the East whose mind is good. Conversely, being in a monastery but not cultivating is like a person in, quote, the pure land whose mind harbors evil. Just purify your mind. That is the West, the pure land of your original nature. And then he says, very interesting below, he says, as long as you practice in accord with these teachings, you will be as always by my side. It's like I'm right by the side of this great teacher. However, if you don't cultivate, then what benefit is your search for the way and shaving your head and talking about ordination? So his definition, all of these are pointing to a Vimalakirti-inspired tone, that the way and the monastery are the straight mind. Shaving your head, putting on robes is very powerful if your intention's there. But if it's not, there's no chi. So here is Vimalakirti. This text is basically devoted to his thing. But this one happens. So Vimalakirti's sick and he's dying. This is how the chapter begins. And he's kind of thinking as he's sitting dying, I wish the Tathagata would come and, take pity on me, it says. Take pity and send someone to inquire about my illness. He's having this thought. And the Buddha knows he's thinking this. Okay, it's no text, there's no tweet. It's just he knows this is happening because he and Vimalakirti share a similar mind ground consciousness. So he says, Shariputra, go inquire after the illness of Vimalakirti. Okay, so he designates Shariputra to go. And having been thus addressed, Shariputra answers the Buddha, I don't think I want to go. He says, Buddha, I'm reluctant to go ask Vimalakirti about his illness. Why? Anybody know why? He's afraid he'll get it? It's infectious? No. What's the reason he's afraid to go? There's an expression, once burned, twice shy. He got burned by Vimalakirti. He said, I remember one day when I was sitting at the foot of the tree in the forest, absorbed in contemplation, sitting in quiet meditation. And Vimalakirti came to the foot of that tree and said to me, hey, Reverend Shariputra, that's not the way to do meditation. You should absorb yourself in meditation or contemplation so that neither body or mind appear anywhere in the triple world. That kind of meditation. He says, you're just sitting there and you have this appearance. But that's not real meditation because it still has a mark to it. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you manifest all ordinary behavior without forsaking nirvana or cessation. So nirvana, samsara should be the same. In samsara, you should be in nirvana. In nirvana, you should not have left samsara. That, he says, is real meditation. Woo. Now, he's sitting there. He's really cool. He's at the foot of a tree. He's really blissed out. And then this Vimalakirti comes up and starts bugging him. He says, you should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you can manifest the nature of an ordinary person without abandoning your cultivated spiritual nature. Whoa. That's real meditation, he says. And you should absorb yourself in contemplation so that the mind neither settles within nor moves without towards external form. So you're not still within and totally zoned out, and you're not all entangled in externals. That's true meditation. It's not either or. You've got to do them both simultaneously. You should meditate or absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that the 37 aids to enlightenment, these are specific practices and manifestations of practice, are manifest without any, what he calls, hanging on to sundry theories. So you understand the Dharma, you hold the Dharma, and yet you're not kind of dogmatic and doctrinaire. And then he says, it's a very confusing one, seemingly. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you are released in liberation, you are unbound, liberated, in the state of nirvana, without abandoning, and the translation is the province of the world, worldly things. Wow. So, that's why Shariputra doesn't want to go and inquire. And the reason why the Sixth Patriarch thing uses this particular passage, he's using the Vimalakirti text to say, this is also my teaching. True meditation, true cultivation doesn't have a mark of sacred, doesn't have a mark of holy, and yet it's completely sacred and holy without having the appearance. And why? Because there's no duality about it whatsoever. It is markless. It is artless. And yet it is full and complete. What has a mark or appearance to it is where it sticks. It's just a little sticking of something. But I must say, that being said, man manzwo in Chinese, which means go slowly. Do not try to get this new non-duality overnight. You start off with precepts, concentration, and practice. And then gradually, as those become more mature, you have a balance point from which you can step into the things that used to confuse you. But if you just say, I'm going to throw it all together now, all the worldly, all the sacred, it's just all in my big grab bag, whoopee, and you're just totally overwhelmed by it. So this is a dynamic process of give and take, pick up, put down. Ultimately, put it all down. But you can't just say, ultimately, I'm here, I put it all down. No. That's the raft thing. The Buddha says, once you get to the other shore, you leave the raft. You don't say, I just heard the raft's an expedient device, and you jump off, you'll drown. But when you get to the other shore, you let go of the raft. So I illustrate this, I hope, with a true story. A little embarrassing, but I'll tell it anyhow. So in the 60s, when I was growing up and trying to establish my name and fame and popularity, anyhow, there was a number of ways to do it. One way to do it was music, particularly guitar and folk music at the time. So if you wanted to be hot and attractive and be the life of the party and whatnot, that's what you did. Now, the reason I saw this was this young man came over and on the front porch with his guitar sang a song to my sister, and she melted. That was it. She fell in love. Oh, that's interesting. So how do you play that thing? And so I learned how to play guitar, and I got pretty good at it, and in that way advanced my ego. I won't go into detail, but it was basically a tool of advancing my ego. And it worked. It worked pretty well. I got pretty good and whatnot. I even backed up Andy Williams at one point. Some of you in the saying, who's that? Never mind. If you don't know, it doesn't matter. But then, as I started to, feel the sort of, as the Buddha says, first you see things as they are and you get a little uninfatuated. There's a kind of disenchantment. And then from the disenchantment, the passion goes out. And then when the passion goes out, you can begin the unbinding. So I was sensing this. So when I became a monk and left home, I'd given up quite a bit at that point, but that guitar was quite special to me. It was like my little raft. And my ego raft. So it was my raft, that was my raft from going to the other shore back to this shore. And so it's like one of the things we did then when we would leave home, we would take whatever that special attachment possession was and make it as a gift to the abbot. Hung Sher gave his astrology books. Well, then took them back, and then gave them back later. So that's the way with these things. You're like, here, no. And so when I gave him the guitar, and said, here's the guitar, and the master said, like, what, you know, you really want to give it? Oh yeah, I want to give it, but I'm not letting go. You know, okay, take it. And so I gave him the guitar, and I thought, okay, that's the end of it. I won't see this again. And then he gave it to a nun who used it to make a record of Dharma songs. So it got a second life, you know, in sacred music rather than what I was singing. And then, so time passed, and then gradually, I think I forgot about it. But then, one day, after a number of years, I was teaching the boys in the boys' school, and I figured it was a really good thing to have well-rounded education. You know, like the Greeks, strong body, strong mind. You develop these sensibilities of the art, the aesthetics, the sciences, and so forth. And our school was a little weak on the artistic and that side, so I thought, well, singing is good. Getting people together to sing, because it lets go of inhibitions. It's really a healthy thing to do depending on the music, but generally, you know, good singing is really a community building, camaraderie for the boys, and so forth, and harmony, and they learn how to work as a group and so forth. So I formed a little singing group, and we were going to perform for one of those, I don't know, Buddhist holidays. I don't know what they were. And but we were singing songs that really needed musical accompaniment. One, because I had gotten boys who, for whatever reason, many were tone deaf. And and it's interesting, the tone deaf one sang the loudest. I don't know why that was. And so, you know, I had to, without hurting feelings, say, you know, your voice is beautiful. It's better when it's quiet, a little softer. And so anyway, we're working on that. But the music would have helped them to hear but you know, we didn't have a piano or anything. And I thought, well, now the guitar, you know, would be handy, but the heck, you know. And then we're in the hall getting ready, and I'm sitting up there doing my directing, and all of a sudden the boys go, and they're looking, and I go, what? And then I look behind me, and it's the master, the abbot, coming into the hall, and going, oh, wow, he's coming, and he's carrying a guitar case. And I'm like, whoa, that looks familiar. Oh, that's my guitar. And I thought, what's he doing? And he comes up, and he said, here, you could use this now, right? I said, well, yeah, I could. I said, well, thank you. And then he just looked at me, and he smiled, and he said, this time, don't go crazy, though. He says, make sure that you play the guitar and the guitar doesn't play you. And he turned and walked out. And I was sort of like, so I could see a little bit of what this Vimalakirti was saying, that if your mind is in the right place, you could actually use a worldly thing in a proper way, but not, you could turn it the other way around. And so it's like, I had the guitar, I misused it, I thought, okay, it's gone, no more. And then when I sort of figured out I could use it properly, it came back through the teacher, but with the lesson learned. And so I say, sort of in your own practice, those things that you're most attached to and confused, you might want to unplug them a bit, sit away from them, and get to know yourself without those attachments and things. And then, bit by bit, as that becomes clear, there may be, not necessarily, but there may be a way to use them that's actually advancing people's cultivation rather than advancing the ego and then impeding theirs in that way. So my own personal lesson, I still have it. I hardly play it at all. And there's other stories regarding the guitar that I won't tell tonight because there's youngsters in the audience. So I will stop there. Anybody, announcements? Any announcements? Ching Chen?
We have the same schedule like usual. Tomorrow is the 7:20 Vatansica lecture. Meditations like today. And you can look at our schedule. All our classes is going on.
Okay, we'll do the transference in English. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding Li San Bao.